Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. I've been having a great time. I think that there's been a lot of great presentations. So I hope that everyone enjoys this one. I think it's a good topic, just a general knowledge of things with what's going on in research and also how we're applying it with the tools that we talk about at this conference. So, so there's three main areas that we'll go over. WormBase itself, which not too many people will know too much about, but I'll go over some of the research with that, some interesting things we're doing, why it makes sense that we're going with Datomic, and we've been doing a project for a couple of years now to work on things in the way of migrating the database over and using it in production. And then we've been using it with AWS to get things going. So I hope you guys enjoy the presentation. So yeah, I'm Adam Wright. I had gotten a degree in biology originally. I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew in high school I did a lot of programming. I really liked it. I did a lot of math then too, and I ended up doing another degree in engineering. Throughout my career, I tried to use programming to further both of those, and WormBase is one of the major projects that I've been working on over the last several years. It's a long-standing project, and yeah, it's one that has a legacy database that has been around for a long time. There's a large code base behind it, and yeah, I really enjoy working on it. So WormBase has 3 different sites, so we have very few people at each site, and they're very specific to what they're doing. So I work at the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research in Toronto. At that institute, in general, what we work on is web development type stuff. At the Hingston site at EBI, they work mainly on the genomics and merging the data together and getting it ready for displaying on the website. And at Caltech, they have a bunch of curators that go through the data. And we go through a release cycle, and so once the data is done, then at OICR, we'll go and add the features on based on the new data. Every time we have a release, which is a 2-month cycle, we have to make slight changes to the website and move forward. So basically, yeah, there's the 3 institutes. I'm from Toronto in the middle. So I thought I'd start with a quote. I don't have quotes all through my presentation, but this one I really like. Alan Turing, everyone knows him. So basically, I'm really happy that we've come a long way. We keep on coming up with new interesting things. I love great ideas and all the things that people are doing with it. A lot of stuff I might not use, but I'm glad people are doing it and just moving the field forward. So with biology, though, this would be one of the main characters that I would say started it all, and I'm glad we didn't go the same direction as biology. So back when he basically discovered genes. He was the original one. He was studying peas, and he came up with all sorts of great ideas. Once he was done with that, though, it took a couple hundred years for people to get focused back on that again. And I'm glad with Alan Turing, we continued on. If we didn't continue, we'd be still making very minor discoveries today and we wouldn't be where we are with closure or anything. So that's one of the major things that we can learn from that is whenever we have great ideas, we need to recognize it, go back to the drawing board and try to figure out what it is that we saw. People just didn't think his ideas were that great or the biggest deal to know to move forward with it, but it was a big deal in the end, obviously. So here in biology, this is like biology 101, but so this is known as the central dogma. You start with your genes, with your genes, which don't change at all from cell to cell. It's fundamentally identical throughout your body, and then there's certain changes with them on what RNA gets expressed. That goes out into the rest of the cell, and then you have proteins. And so the proteins in general are the things that do stuff. Initially, when they were going through this, though, there's a lot of RNA in the nucleus. They didn't know that DNA was the biggest thing. They thought that it was probably the RNA. They had this concept of gene from Mendel and research since, and they realized once they figured out the double helix structure and how it worked on how we passed genes from one cell to the other and duplicated them, that it was definitely the genetic code. And then these days, we're going back to the RNA, and we're figuring out that it isn't all about the DNA, that the RNA is going back and influencing the DNA strongly. So there's a lot of research going on with that. So especially cancer research and stuff, we have a lot mapped and in the way of the genomics, but once we get the RNA in there, that we'll learn a lot. So there's still a lot to learn, though, is kind of the major point there. And so this brings us to model organisms. These are just a bunch of the main ones: rat, mouse, worm, yeast, fly, and that would be zebrafish. So there's model organism databases, and these are major things in research. There's huge databases of information on these. Obviously, where I work, we focus on the worm, but major discoveries have been brought out of all of those, and hopefully be brought out to human research, or just have really interesting discoveries for the purpose of knowledge and maybe for agriculture, for whatever purpose, but we learn a lot through the different ones. Why they're so major is because they're very simple. And one of the things, relative to the human cell, they are extremely simple, and they have very short lifespans. So you can, for pretty much all of them, but for sure with the worm, they have every cell mapped out through their development. And so from just being born to a full-grown worm, they can know what interacts with what to become that worm, and they can know what proteins interact with what proteins. So if in the human research we have a certain sequence, ideally we'd be able to go to the worm and see if they've discovered something with that, would be an example of something. So yeah, so that brings us to WormBase. Why is it around? It's been around for quite a while. There's a fair bit of funding for it. Like historically, there's a lot of researchers researching it. So this is the full-grown worm. I'm not expecting people to memorize it, but yeah, just knowing that they can map things very well with the worm. And there's a whole community of people, kind of like we're a small fraction of the programming community, very passionate people. There's passionate people about worms, and they love them. And I've been working on this for a couple of years. I'm starting to love them too. So this is in general how it works, though. We have the researchers, they go out into the lab, and it could be anything from adding stimulus, external stimulus of CO2 or whatever, and they see how the worm reacts. They try to figure out why the worm has that trait and what's causing it. So they could change the genes, they could do all sorts of things. And then there's a paper written, ideally, that we discover something, and then we have a bunch of curators that go out and they read all these journal articles. They figure out what they truly believe, what they don't, and how it would fit into the data set. And then it gets put into the database, and then ideally the researcher will get to figure out that instead of reading a very large number of papers, they can go through and narrow it down through the years. Instead of reading the last, say, 30 years of papers on worms, you might want to have it summarized with some nice diagrams and stuff. So in the end, there initially was just a database, and then with my boss, it started with making a website. This is the new design. It was made about 5 years ago. They used a popular Perl MVC to make it, and it's heavily used by any of the researchers out there in the worm world. I've talked to them, and they'll use it on a daily basis. They'll go through, you can look up genes, you can, all sorts of relationships. So the database itself has a very complicated schema, and yeah, so they need a database that can handle this. So initially, they created this database called AceDB, and AceDB is particularly made for the worm. So there was, at the time, they didn't have a database that could do all this. So it's a graph database. It keeps track of timestamps for when people make changes. It's fairly simple in the way of the user interface being so that some biologist that has some Perl or some sort of experience in the way of programming can easily go in and learn from what's in the database to add fields or see the relationships and make queries. So it had a powerful query language with it, which, similar to Datomic, has a very powerful programming experience with it. And so these are the types of things that they were needing to be able to make this very large database and keep track of all of the different types and have it change as research changes, as things are added and into the field over several years. So on the downside, though, we ended up having, so it was initially made, I've seen documentation of it being fairly large in the early 90s. So to actually use it, there aren't so many. There was many groups using it back then. Over time, it just, we're having problems with scale of it falling over so we have a huge caching layer with the website, and we just are not finding that it's working in the way of being able to have many people working on it, because you can't have too many people writing. So we'll have a merging system. We'll have people working on different ones. We'll merge them together for the release cycle. So there's an ingrained way in which we do it within our institute, and we have this challenge. As of a few years ago, we took this on to figure out how will we solve it. What are we going to do? It's the central part of everything we do. It's a major thing to be able to not go a few more years and try to figure it out. So we have this, we started with database selection. There is someone else before me that I was slightly a part of it, but there is someone hired that did this solely going and researching the benefits and the drawbacks of all the different databases. So here are several of them. There's also, so OrientDB you might not have heard of, but it's like Neo4j. It's a little more open. I was a fan of that one at the time. And then there's relational databases. There's MongoDB, which most of you have heard of. A lot of these didn't meet the needs that we wanted. One of the biggest things that we wanted was the timestamps, so that we could know when someone made a change and who made the change, and go back into history and figure out what it was previously. These are some features that we thought would be highly beneficial. CouchDB we actually used for the cache. We had some experience with it, but it wasn't going to scale for us. It didn't have the tooling that we wanted. And the person that was looking into it also had a Java background. So they were, we already were leaning in certain directions with it. And then, so surprise, surprise, at a Clojure conference, we chose Datomic, and we really liked it. We started with it. We didn't know at the beginning whether it was the right thing. Thomastown, the previous developer, he went and he made a lot of great code. He had a lot of domain knowledge, so he was able to create a lot of code fairly quickly, and he chose it. So he really enjoyed Clojure. He really took advantage of the timestamps, which I'll go over a bit later, and the fact that we could, in this case, take our graph database and port it into Datomic as a graph database. We have entities and edges, and the edges we actually have some information on. We were able to get that into there. So it was very impressive. So far, we've implemented most of these things on this diagram that most of you have seen. It's off the main website. And we just haven't implemented, we haven't gone into the caching layer that comes with Datomic, but we're highly looking into it. We're at the stage right now of, as we use it more and more heavily, that we would want to be using that. So this is like the take-home message, this slide. I feel like everything that we're trying to do here, that we have found with Clojure to Datomic to everything, that the maintainability is the biggest selling feature of all of this. That you can go in and you can have confidence that things aren't changing. Like, this is a mantra that gets told repeatedly, but we have found a lot of success with this. We found that we have a very small team of developers, and we have been able to write fairly complicated queries and manipulate the data quite a bit and go back into our own code and figure out what's going on. And it's not just a matter of the language forcing it on you, but it seems very common through the whole Clojure community, I find, and through all of the documentation and the presentations. Those were all very helpful for figuring this out. So yeah, we had to go from this prototype to production. Well, what was involved with that? So like, we had to go from, we had some code that would migrate the database from AceDB to Datomic. We have a whole pipeline for this, and which I'll go over a bit later. And it's a major step. We had to make sure that this was dead on, that all of the data was being converted over correctly, that it was able to be done within a reasonable amount of time, and that we would be able to repeatedly do this, because we can't just convert over. One of the things we found is that we can't convert over to the new database all at once. This is going to take us, we're part of the way there. It's going to take us maybe another 6 months to a year to get the full website running off of it. And so we do one URL on a REST interface at a time. And yeah, so with the REST API, we have to, it was nice that we have things isolated so that we can do one at a time. It's not all at once. We can break it up. And so we are very cautious with each one that it is producing the same answers as the previous one. And there's a certain amount of feedback that we get as we do this. So it's a very iterative process that we might find there's an error in how we are migrating the data. At this point, it's very stable. But there are things like that. And then the other thing that we need to do is we need to make these curation web interfaces. And there was a prototype made of that, but this is also in the next stage of what we're working on, is to try to make it so that the overall goal is that we can have this website that curators can go in right away, make a change because someone notices that throughout the process that something wasn't curated correctly, whether it's a spelling mistake or something more major, and that it would be up right away. Right now we have the issue of that it could be several months later that by the time that fix is made, maybe the person that made the request, it doesn't affect them anymore. They're aware of it and they've moved on. So if they see it happening right away, we might get a lot more feedback with this. The other side of it is that we want to display on the website all these changes. So like in the way of what were the updates over the last month, and if you're looking at genes or whatever entity you're looking at, list the top 10 or that sort of thing. And if they're wondering, because they saw something that was a certain value, they could look back and see what it was several months ago. And hopefully we'd be able to get rid of the release cycle that we currently have and just have this continuous integration with the database. So with this diagram, what I'm showing, and it looked very similar to the talk yesterday, is first we output the data from AceDB as XML files. We convert that over to EDN files. And then what we're doing that's quite special that we really like that we could do, and it has had a lot of benefit already, is that we sort those logs in EDN. And as we import them, then we convince the transactor at the time of each one of the items in the EDN file that that's the time at which it went in. So then when we can search the database, now we have a trace back over the last 30 years of what got put in when. We don't have like things that were deleted, which as we go forward, then we'll have the immutability that Datomic has, but we do have timestamps if you put the stuff into the database in the right order. So, and then we have some testing, which of course is very important. And so we have on the bottom right is the Datomic database itself, and then we have a version on it. So every 2 months we're still creating this. And this pipeline we are still modifying, but it's fairly complete, and it works quite well to go and query throughout the time. And so that is a very positive in the way of, now we have a lot of confidence going forward that on the website we'll be able to show people what the data was at different points in time and do some analysis with that. So, sorry. So yeah, here's the architecture that we started with. And this, up until 6 months or a year ago, was our full architecture. So we have a Postgres database with Intermine, which is a query tool that you put data in. It's very standardized. Several of these model organism databases have this, and it has a common search interface that the user on the website can use. So all of the data goes in there. In Catalyst, which is the Perl MVC, you have several different data stores. So Zapier is for the search index, and then we have a caching layer with CouchDB, we have AceDB, and so this is what we started with. What we're going to with the intermediate step and what we've added in is this Datomic layer where Catalyst itself will pull information through a REST interface from Datomic, and we keep on adding more and more of this as time goes on. So we actually are currently reducing the amount of caching that we're needing to do, which is beneficial because during the caching step, we are having problems with pulling the data out of the database. It will fail at times. It will over time, as the data gets larger, it takes more time to do, and that's one of the major things that we want to take out. And as we've been releasing stuff with Datomic, then we have noticed errors. So like we go through the process where the curators look at it with an internal website, and then once it gets on the internet, there's still times in which people find errors. So we go and push those changes right away. So we don't cache those pages the information that's coming from Datomic. And we are able to have it updated right away, which is nice. So this is what we're going towards in the future, though. There still will be, there's some complexity left out of this in the way of we're going to have like an Elasticsearch that will be indexed off of Datomic is what our plan is. And but overall, the amount of work being done by Catalyst won't be as much. So, and yeah, in the MySQL database, there's sequence information. We're not really sure. There's some complexity like that of should it be in Datomic or not. At this point, we're not too sure. It's not changing over time. So like sometimes there would be a new release, but it's very rare. So chances are we're either going to map it with the REST interface, have closure map it to what's inside of Datomic, or have just Catalyst be the solution to that, and which that code's already written. But ideally, we would take out as much of the work from Catalyst as possible and use it mainly as a templating engine. So the next step of what we were doing, once we got things running, we were fairly confident with it. We had to start doing things. We have a very small team, so what worked well for us was, even though you already have a jar, it's nice to Dockerize it and know. So there's certain environment variables that we need set and information like that. So once we have it in Docker, for the REST API, we put that inside of Docker, I should say. And we use Elastic Beanstalk. So that's a AWS service that I didn't quite understand by reading it before using it, but it does all sorts of things for you. It's very impressive in the way of we can just, we create this Docker file, we deploy it, and it will go through and it will keep track of logs, it will keep track of the health of the machine, and you have a very simple way to do continuous integration where based on your latest commit, when you've done your tests and everything, you can say EB deploy, and it will just deploy it, and then we have more stuff running on, like another URL running on our REST interface. And we have a lot of confidence with it. It's just running a fairly simple Docker container that's running like a Java server with our jar running on it, and that worked quite well. And then with CloudFormation, it's very similar to Elastic Beanstalk. It's another AWS service. So there's tools that Datomic provides for you that allow you to create the JSON configuration file for spinning up a transactor. What we did with that was we started with what that creates, and then we added more. And so one of the things that we wanted with ours was we wanted to add tags onto the machine, because we have automatic processes based on what the tags are on what we do with that machine and how we calculate our utilization of the resources and stuff. So we wanted it tagged, and then the other thing is we have it within a virtual private cloud on AWS to reduce cost and to just manage security in the way of permissions and all sorts of stuff. So we added a layer into that. This is all available, so if you went to GitHub and looked up WormBase, you can see our JSON file there. We've also pulled out the Datomic Pro key, a license key from that, so we provide that as an argument, and we have certain tools, so we have that in a file, and we just pass that in. And then Ansible, so we don't use Ansible so much anymore for, like we were using it at the beginning. It's moved over to Docker, but that sort of thing in the way of provisioning stuff, we use a mix of stuff. We still use some Ansible. We use a lot of make files and some Python scripts for spinning up these machines. And that's worked quite well, mainly because there isn't too much configuration to do. I'm quite a fan of Ansible in the idempotent way that people normally can use it in the way of keeping track of state of machines and stuff. But yeah, Elastic Beanstalk in particular has taken over a lot of that. So it just uses configuration files within your repo. So this is how, a little bit more depth of how to use Elastic Beanstalk. So when we make our container, we end up having to put the AWS credentials within it. And this makes it so that it needs to be proprietary and not just on Docker Hub or something like that. And when you have your AWS account, there's a certain amount of free space that you can have. So we use the container registry, which is the one at the top there, that people can pull stuff or like put their Docker containers in. And and they provide a nice web interface and integration with the AWS tools. And then we go and we use the Elastic Beanstalk to go and spin up so on the right, that REST API there is the EC2 container that it spins up. And every time you do an EB deploy to the user, it looks like the exact same machine. And within the web interface also, as if you're using the exact same hardware, but it spins up, it truly in the back end spins up a new one. And it works quite well for just being aware of the status, the health status of your machine and everything, that everything's up and running correctly. This is the CloudFormation, how it looks. So we spin up a new transactor for every Datomic release that we have. So the database itself is DynamoDB, which is AWS database. That's basically how they have it, is just a single table, which works really well with how Datomic works. And so you have a table within DynamoDB, and then you go and you point your transactor towards that. So one transactor points out a single table. So you can have many databases within one DynamoDB, but we split it up for just being able to roll over from one database to the next without worrying about deleting it completely, stuff like that. So we have separate machines for each transactor. And this is done with a single command on our development server to just spin up these machines, and they're there. We've been doing this for about 6 months, maybe 8 months now, and it's a very clean process for just managing your resources. And we have adjusted the size of machines and stuff like that. We found it very useful. And so the people that I mainly work with, so my boss, Dr. Lincoln Stein, Todd Harris is my manager, and then the main team that I've been working with, Matt Russell, he's here with me. Please stop us if you have any questions about Datomic. We'd love to talk about it. We've had a lot of success with it, and we're really excited about what we're going to have in the future in the way of functionality on the website. Thomastown, he's the guy that started everything. He wrote a lot of code. We wouldn't be where we are today without him. He had a lot of domain knowledge and wrote it down for us. So and then Sybil and Juan Carlos, they're starting in with how we've set up everything using Line and everything. Sybil just started in within the last month, and she's been very productive already. She loves helping out. She already was quite proficient with, she's mainly a JavaScript developer and some Perl, and I guess Python, and she really enjoys it. On any project out there, I would highly recommend Clojure for the purpose of the developers are enjoying it. And then we're just starting in with Juan Carlos, and it's helping us with how I started with how we have a very distributed team across the world, very different time zones. Trying to communicate between California and England isn't very easy, but having very organized code and very organized projects, very organized tool base from the Clojure community has been very useful. So thank you. Yeah.